We're going to start our second panel. And to my left, instead of introducing everybody, I think I'm going to have everybody just say 30 seconds about themselves. So Tom, Ambassador, Daniel, and Annabelle, please say a few things about yourself. Thank you.
We don't have to touch anything on the mic. The tech team told me we don't have to fool around. But anyway, Chinh, thank you. My name is Tom Vallely. I've been introduced earlier. I'm now at the Weatherhead East Asian Institute, and I am with Lee and Hoang. We teach the history of the Vietnam War course. Many of the people asking the questions are from our course. I'm grateful to them. I'm going to stop there and go to Ambassador Giang.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tommy. I'm Giang, Ambassador of Vietnam to the United Nations since 2022, and I'm going to conclude my tenure here in end of May. So I see you all in Hanoi after that.
Hey everyone, I'm Dan Kritenbrink. I'm currently a partner at the Asia Group, which is a business consultancy. But the whole reason why I'm here is I just retired from the State Department after 31 years. And I had the great fortune, really, probably the single most important stroke of good luck that I've encountered in my life and my career was being able to work on Vietnam for the last decade. From 2015 to 2017, I was Senior Director for Asia for President Obama. From 2017 to 21, I was the American Ambassador to Vietnam for almost the entire Trump administration, beginning of the Biden administration. And then from 2021 to 2025, I was the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia Pacific Affairs in charge of the whole region. And that decade, which in many ways for me was dominated by Vietnam, has been the most professionally and personally satisfying decade of my life, and look forward to talking about it today. Thank you.
And Dan, Leon tells me that you are a professional rapper. So if anybody wants to hear Daniel rap later on, please raise your hand.
You want me to say something about the rap now, or you want to say
sure,
it for
please.
later?
Yeah.
All right,
Very good.
I got a couple of points about the rap. The fact that an American ambassador to Vietnam thought it was a good idea to make a rap video says something about the state of the U.S. Vietnam partnership. I give all the credit to my team. My public affairs team came to me one day and they said, "Hey, Mr. Ambassador, we know you do these cute little TET videos every year, but nobody really watches them and they're not very good." So he said, "Did you know that rap, hip hop is the most popular, art form today among young people?"
And look at you, you embody.
Yeah, I embody that. I embody that. And I said, "No, I didn't know that." He said, "So why don't we spice it up this year? Let's do a TET rap video." And I said, "Okay, I may lose my job for this, but please do it." So we did it. It's very popular in Vietnam.
Sorry.
Then it went viral globally for about a week or so. Then I kind of wanted to crawl into a hole and die. And I thought I might in fact lose my job. But I knew maybe it had turned out okay when two things happened. Former President Obama sent me a handwritten note saying he loved my rap. Didn't know I had it in me. He was glad that I was still jazzed about doing my job. And MC Hammer retweeted the video of my rap. And that's when I felt like I must have arrived. But thank you for raising that.
Hello, everyone. My name's Annabelle. I work for Amazon Web Services. I've always been in the digital policy space. I've had over 15 years of experience in the digital policy space. And I'm based out in Asia, and I've always been based out of Asia. So I'm really glad to be here today. Can't say that I have a rap video, even though I don't want to say it, but I feel like maybe I might be more,
Slightly more hip? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm not saying that.
So.
I'm not saying that. But hey, if you can get a viral rap video,
I'm confident you can.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should collaborate. That's what I'm saying.
Maybe, okay.
Like that's how I'll do it.
What I told my colleagues was I was a one-hit wonder, never again. And my colleagues asked me if I was sad that I'll be better known as a rapper than as a diplomat. And I told them yes, a little bit. But maybe we can team up.
Yeah, never say never. But really, really excited for this conversation today.
Okay.
Tommy?
Okay. Chinh, thank you. Lee and Hoang and I sort of want to run this panel a little bit differently. I am going to be the sort of, we're going to be like on a podcast. I'm going to be asking a series of questions and try to get some some stimulation. I just brought a gift to Dan Kritenbrink and Annabelle Lee. I brought them a version, the publication of a Harvard University published book, published in 2023, about Vietnam's post-war development. This book has 5 or 6 authors from Fulbright University, Vietnam, from Columbia, and from Harvard, and it's not a guide to the future, but it is a guide to what the building blocks of that future might be. Okay? And there's 2 important chapters in the book. One written by the editor, of one of the editors, Professor Dwight Perkins, who's quite a famous figure in the study of East Asia, and he came to Vietnam with me in 1989, and he previously had written the strategy for South Korea and is a scholar of the Chinese development. And he and one of my colleagues at Fulbright wrote a very important chapter here about what the next growth model of Vietnam will look like. The reason I brought them those 2 volumes is, in preparing for this, I'm a friend of Ambassador Giang's, and I know from giving Ambassador Giang this book a year ago, besides the editors, he's the only person I know that's ever read the whole thing. So I'm not disparaging the book. I think a great deal of the book, but I also have enormous, and when I was talking about teasing him about another book, that's not the book I'm going to be teasing him about. But this book is for my other panelists. I have talked with the group. Chinh and I have talked with them about the sort of the format here a little bit. So I want to start with something that happened a few days ago. Several days ago, General Secretary To Lam issued a statement on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the end of the war. In it, Mr. To Lam refers to the importance of reconciliation between Vietnam and the United States and among the Vietnamese people themselves. After describing movingly interactions between American and Vietnamese veterans and the rapid growth of the U.S. Vietnam relations, Mr. To Lam writes, quote, "There is no reason for the Vietnamese people to continue to carry hatred, divisions, and separations in their hearts." Significantly, for a Vietnamese leader to acknowledge so publicly the need for national reconciliation is quite remarkable in my judgment. The General Secretary goes on and says, quote, "National reconciliation does not mean forgetting history or easing differences, but accepting different perspectives in a spirit of tolerance and respect to work towards a greater goal, building a peaceful, unified, powerful, civilized, and prosperous Vietnam." I would like to ask Ambassador Giang and Ambassador Kritenbrink to share their reflections on Mr. To Lam's message. What makes this message so significant? How do you think it will be received by Vietnamese inside and outside Vietnam? And what impact do you think this statement could have on Mr. To Lam's goals of accelerating the development of Vietnam's technology economy?
Thank you, Tommy, for the question and for putting in very interesting topic for this session. I think the General Secretary Tolam has said something that that is in the mind of almost every Vietnamese people in Vietnam or abroad or overseas. And I fully agree with anh Chinh at the first session when he talks about we cannot rewrite the history, but we can shape the future by taking into account the lessons we took from the history for the past. And as for the past, I believe that the previous session has touched upon a number of issues and topics. And therefore, I just want to share some ideas, some views, of my views and opinions about the future in my own experience and narrative. I think that over the past 50 years, the relations between Vietnam and the U.S. has been defined by very important actors. And those are the veterans, those are the Senate and or the negotiators during the Paris Accord. And these generations, these eminent peoples are the ones who feel the pain of the war. And they have made a lot of efforts to overcome the consequences of the war, of the trust deficit, to get together and to foster a better future. So that's what we have enjoying here is the deliverables of the past 50 years. I just want to tell you a story when I was a junior diplomat, and I was in the room in the talks between Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng and Secretary Kerry. At the first, before starting the conversation, Secretary Kerry asked Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng, "Where did you fight?" And Prime Minister said, "I fought in Nam Can." And it turned out that it's the same place where Secretary Kerry was when he was a soldier. And Secretary Kerry answered that, "I'm glad that you missed your shot, so I survived." So the conversation begins in a very warm and cozy manner. And we have gained a lot from that kind of spirit of trust and mutual understanding. That is the past 50 years, how it was. I think the upcoming 50 years will be embraced by a totally different generation, by everyone who, young people who are sitting here, and they have no idea about maybe they can feel the war, but they don't know, I don't think that they know much about the war. I myself, I'm very proud to be among the first generation who was born right after 1975, I think including Liên Hằng and many others here. And we didn't know about the war, but we feel the scars, and we can even touch the scar of our relatives. My father fought in the war for 13 years, and he's a real VC. And I grown up with his everyday stories about the war and about how he fight and how he survived. And I also grown up with the poverty that make us determined to overcome the poverty and work with other partners, including the U.S., for better trade partnership. I was also grown up with the fear of the consequence of Orange agent. That's why I'm the only child of the family. My parents was afraid of having another babies because of the threat of the fear that he or she would be affected by the Orange agent. And that's why I was very happy to see how Vietnam and the US work together. And I'm proud to be among those people who also contribute my modest contribution to this process. And with that, I think that we have very different narratives to contribute to the future of the US-Vietnam relations. But nevertheless, I think that the elements for the future of our relationship remain the same. First is about mutual understanding and trust. If the US understands that Vietnam really want, for not just for the upcoming period, but also for 2,000 years in our history, just one word, independence. Second, freedom, and then prosperity. And then if we have the mutual understanding like that, I think we can build up a better future for both the US and for Vietnam. And secondly, I think the second elements for the future is development and mutual benefit. As a diplomat, I think, and for any diplomats, I believe that we all understand that talking is not enough. Nice words are not enough. We need the real benefit on the ground for the people, for our peoples. Therefore, the closer connection between businesses, community are the most important to enhance and to have a sustainable partnership between the two countries. And third element is the global issues. I think Vietnam's now in the different position to engage in working with other partners, including the US, in various areas, in the climate change, in the cybercrime, cybersecurity, and many others. This morning, I just talked to our US partner in the State Department about nuclear cooperation, nuclear disarmament, and including nuclear energy. And therefore, we think that there are a lot of similarities and a lot of common benefit that we can work together and to build a better future for our generation, for us, for you, and for everyone in the room today. And in this regard, the actors of to move the future, to embrace the future are very important. So therefore, I think that the American Vietnamese diaspora here in the US is very important. We have a large community here with more than 2 million people. It is a population of even larger than a number of countries in the world. And I think that if we have together enjoy our solidarity, our unity, then and understanding our root, our history, then I think that we can definitely can achieve what the General Secretary has set out for us. And in this regard, I think that the efforts that we are doing now, like the Vietnam program in Colombia is doing now, is very meaningful to have for our generation to understand, have a better understanding and comprehensive understanding about our past. So to define our future accordingly. And we also think that the cooperation between the US and Vietnam with the contribution of the Vietnamese diaspora in America to foster a new generation of Vietnam, a more skillful people, a more intellectual forces, I think we can achieve anything that is ahead of us. So I think that's for that. I'd like to conclude my remarks and invite Dan to elaborate your views. Thank you.
Thank you. You want me to answer your question or also talk more broadly?
I want you to answer what I think
No, that was great.
I think the issue.
I agreed with everything you said.
This is what Mr. Tolam said.
Yeah.
Is different than the previous leadership of the Communist Party has said about. Different is different in the sense that we're dealing with the differences don't matter, he says. That he's allowing a bigger space for reconciliation. He's creating new and dynamic and different space for further reconciliation amongst the Vietnamese people. And the title of his speech is One Vietnam, One People. And I think that it's a significant, and I'm just, that's my own judgment. I'm asking your judgment about what you think of the significance.
Well, Tommy, again, I just want to thank you and Professor Lien Hoang and Chinh for inviting me. It's such an honor to be here, and having dedicated sort of the last decade of my life to this relationship, lots of thoughts in my brain, but let me try to narrowly answer your question. On the one hand, I'm not surprised at all that General Secretary Do Lam would give such a speech that focuses on reconciliation in the past and what it means today, because I think one fundamental point that you're trying to make through this whole conference is how important history still is to the U.S. Vietnam relationship. I always tell friends that the U.S. Vietnam partnership and friendship today is forward-looking. When I was Assistant Secretary, when I was Ambassador, and I would talk with Ambassador Zoom or Ambassador Gui or others, we spent 90% of our time or more talking about the here and now and the future, how we want to make our countries more prosperous, more successful, stronger. But we absolutely have to recognize that we wouldn't be here today and we wouldn't have this partnership and friendship if we hadn't faced squarely the issues of the past and if we hadn't addressed them so productively and carefully. So I'm not surprised at all that, especially on this 50th anniversary, the General Secretary Do Lam would still focus on the tragedy of that war. And I think it is close to miraculous that we've got this amazing partnership and friendship today. When I was ambassador in Hanoi, I used to say, America is more popular in Vietnam than anywhere else in the world. How did that happen? How did we become trusted partners and friends? But I said those same words to the first American ambassador, Pete Peterson, that this was a miracle, and he got very angry with me. And he said, no, you're wrong. A miracle means it was an act of God or an accident. That's not what happened here. People of courage and goodwill worked really hard over the last several decades to build that. So it's not a surprise in that way. And I think we also have to recognize that even though it's a forward-looking partnership, it's built on this foundation of trust, built largely by this work on legacy of war and humanitarian issues. And we forget that history at our own peril. We defund the work to remediate docks and UXO and treat people with disabilities at our own peril. The second reason why I'm not surprised by the General Secretary's comments, Tommy, is I have tremendous respect for General Secretary Do Lam. When he was Minister of Public Security, he was one of my main contacts. I'm guessing, Dave, you probably feel the same way. I thought he was extraordinarily strategic, practical, and he's a guy who can get things done. And the reason why an American ambassador saw him as one of his best contacts and friends was for those reasons. And I always knew that we didn't agree on every issue. I knew he was a fierce defender of Vietnam's interests, but I also knew that we had a shared strategic objective. I used to tell him that America is invested in seeing a strong, prosperous, and independent Vietnam. Even though we fought 50 years ago to try to destroy your country, today we think it's in our national interest for you to succeed. And I think the General Secretary and others believe that, and that's what's helped us build this partnership. I'm also not surprised, Tommy, because I think we've got a tremendous opportunity now under General Secretary Do Lam. I think the last, well, if not the last decade, certainly the last 5 years, I think there's been a lot of concern internally in Vietnam that the anti-corruption campaign, I think, really stymied some of Vietnam's own development, slowed things down. I think a lot of friends inside the Vietnamese system were afraid to make certain decisions because of a fear of maybe making the wrong choice, or, when people are fearful, they're not going to take risks. So I see the General Secretary's comments as part of his larger push to say, no, that's not the focus right now. When I was in Hanoi a month ago, and we had the honor of meeting with the General Secretary. I couldn't believe the ambition behind his message. He said that Vietnam is going to meet its development goals by having 10% GDP growth for the next 10 to 20 years. And we're only going to do it through foreign investment, including from the United States. And we're going to do it in tech sectors, in defense sectors, in health. It was really extraordinary. And I didn't hear anything about any corruption. And we met with almost all of the rest of the government, and nobody told me that the priority was anti-corruption. They told me the priority was growth and investment. Now that says to me that's a leader who's confident. And I think only a leader who's confident can take on something as sensitive as North-South reconciliation. And even though we've made all of this tremendous progress over the last 50 years, these historical issues are still sensitive. Why was it controversial whether the American ambassador for the first time was going to go to the April 30 celebration? Because these issues are hard. Why is it I've never heard a General Secretary talk about North-South reconciliations? Because I think it's still sensitive. And I agree with Ambassador Giang too. If I had to create a homework list on the reconciliation front for America and Vietnam, I would start at the top of that list. I would have reconciliation between Vietnam and the Vietnamese American community as being the top issue, because I think it's the place that lags the farthest behind. April 30 has a very different meaning to many of our Vietnamese American friends. I'm so proud of the success of the Vietnamese American community, but that's the place where we need to do a lot of homework. But I think you can tell through my answer, Tommy, overall I'm quite bullish on the U.S. Vietnam partnership. I'm quite bullish on Vietnam's future. And I think under General Secretary Do Lum's leadership, we have an opportunity to work under a leader who's confident enough to make this statement, is also confident enough to tell the Americans that we want to partner with you in every way, but is also confident enough he's going to continue Vietnamese diplomacy. Vietnam is going to continue to develop partnerships around the world. And I think our Vietnamese friends are amongst the clearest strategic thinkers I've ever met, amongst the most practical I've ever met. But there's probably both a ceiling and a floor to the U.S. Vietnam partnership. I don't think we're ever going to be allies. I always tell friends that I think the animating feature of Vietnamese history, you tell me, Ambassador Giang, I think the animating feature of Vietnamese history is a struggle for Vietnamese identity and survival, oftentimes from the threat from your big northern neighbor. But even though that is a fact, I think Vietnam is also very careful to balance against China by not going too far with the Americans. I'll stop with one final anecdote, Tommy. I've forgotten about this till Ambassador Zoom mentioned a little while ago. When I was ambassador, such a meaningful experience. I felt like we achieved so much. But I remember I pushed very hard. Why can't we upgrade to a comprehensive strategic partnership? I think I went into your office one day and said, I saw you just upgraded to a CSP with this country. Are you telling me that country is more important than the United States?
Italy.
Yeah, basically. And I came up with this analogy. I don't know if it was appropriate or not, but I came up with this analogy. I started telling my Vietnamese friends in Hanoi, and I literally forgot this until Ambassador Zoom reminded me. I used to tell them that it felt like we were in a relationship and America was the girl, Vietnam was the boy, and the Vietnamese boy was saying to the American girl on a daily basis, no, you're really special to me. I really, really like you, but just to make it very clear, we will never hold hands in public, and I will never introduce you to my parents. But I really, really love you. You're really, really the best. And I was provocative enough with that line with my Vietnamese friends that I elicited the reaction that I think I was looking for, that explained to me Vietnamese strategic thinking. And I heard two things. One very senior Vietnamese official once said to me, no, don't make no mistake about it, Kritenbrink. America's our number one partner. We're dependent on you. We need you. And he said, and we will never say that in public. We never can. And you're going to have to get used to that. Full stop. So stop complaining. The second, I had a similar conversation once with a Vietnamese friend who also got exasperated with me and said, Kritenbrink, I've had enough. He said, you Americans need to understand one thing. When we think about cooperating with the USA, we ask ourselves, does it deter China or provoke China? And it's really as simple as that. So anyway, long-winded way of saying we have to be realistic about the floor and the ceiling and the relationship, but I still remain really bullish overall, especially under a leader as capable as Do Lum. Thank you.
Great. Very good. Thank you. Thank both ambassadors for these answers. I want to turn. I have become friends with Annabelle Lee in her role at Amazon Web Services. I want to change I want to focus a little bit more on what the panel is about, Chinh, which is what is the future. And part of the future, I think, and I think part of the previous questions that came up about Vietnamese, the management of Vietnamese non-alignment, and how is that going to unfold? And we talked a little bit in panel one, Chinh, about military-to-military cooperation, and I think the community, diplomatic community, answered that sufficiently. I think I am the person who came up with the term that Vietnam, with respect to the United States, is a digital swing state. And the digital swing state is the new way of thinking what is the next level of U.S. Vietnam cooperation that is consistent with Vietnam being a non-aligned state. All right, so I think the AWS is probably more important than Cam Ranh Bay. Right, so I think in the space that we're getting into, the projection.
Very good, Tommy. Have you written that down? Have you published that somewhere?
I am good enough at Vietnamese politics not to publish too much.
No, that's pretty profound.
So I came up with the digital swing state in cooperation with Ann Neuberger. And Ann Neuberger became at the National Security Council that Dan used to be the head of, but Ann Neuberger became a friend of mine, and Ann was introduced to me by Vietnam. So I did not learn. I did not become friends with Ann through the Vietnamese through the U.S. government. I know the president at the time quite well, as the ambassadors know. But the term the swing state is, I think, is centralized to how Vietnam's future looks. Vietnam cannot succeed. I gave the book out that I mentioned at the beginning about what the new growth model of Vietnam is going to be. And I commented a little bit, Chinh, in the first. It's going to be about education. It's going to be about higher value, but it's not going to be the one you have now. And the race for what it's going to be, Annabelle was at the roundtable, Chinh, when we had Mr. Tolam here in September of 2024. And I wanted to ask her, although, Annabelle, the events are only 7 months ago when we had that first roundtable, it feels like a great deal has changed in the world economically and politically. And in light of the Vietnam government's ambition to develop a dynamic tech sector, such as expressed in the strategic documents, such as Resolution 57, which was adopted about the time of December 2024. What do you think Vietnam needs to do in order to attract international investments in technology?
That's a huge question, and I'm going to try and break it down. So first of all, I want to say that for Amazon Web Services, for our business, what we do every day is basically help our customers, who are companies, startups, SMBs, sometimes large enterprises, sometimes governments, all over the world, to innovate, digitally transform, offer new services that they've never been able to offer to customers, to end users, to citizens, in a manner that is safe, secure, resilient, and most importantly, that they continue to have sovereignty over their own data, control over their own data, control over who accesses that data. It's incredibly important from a commercial value proposition, but it's obviously even more important when you're looking at nations and governments and when they're thinking about sovereignty. So this is who we are as a company. This is what we represent globally, and this doesn't change although I will say it gets more complicated with the geopolitics of the day. Like our commitment to all our customers, regardless of who you are, where you're from, what kind of organization you are, remains the same. So the first thing I want to say is that for AWS, for what we've seen in Vietnam today, the technology revolution is already there. I just want to say that really, really clearly. Vietnam has one of the most vibrant startup tech ecosystems in Southeast Asia today, if not the most vibrant. It has a very, very talented young population who are basically, helping to build for the entire region, if not the world. So they are coding today, they are opening companies, they are opening startups, and they're going global. So this is not something that I would say it's future looking. I would say it's actually here today. However, I do think that as Vietnam continues to digitize, the reality is, as with many countries and many governments who are struggling a little bit with figuring out how do you actually regulate digital? What are the new issues that are coming out that innovation is well and good, it's very important, we care about the economic impact of digital, but how do we ensure that that's balanced against what is good for society? It is balanced against responsibilities and new threats, honestly, that are emerging in the digital space. And it's a very early and nascent stage. And so for Vietnam as well, that self-determination process is very, very important. And I will answer your big question, but I will say this first. What I have been incredibly lucky and I think fortunate in representing my company, working with the Vietnamese government, is the openness, the technocratic nature of the Vietnamese government, their willingness to listen, understand the technology, understand what they're actually dealing with, before deciding how they want to write a law or regulation that would help them achieve their policy goals. And again, as a company, we are not a government, right? So we fully respect that every single government will have policy goals that they're trying to achieve. Our job is to make sure that as they are achieving those policy goals, they're actually writing laws and regulations that are practicable with the technology that we're using and doesn't over-regulate, but also doesn't under-regulate. So I think that's a very, very important aspect. So to answer your question, Tommy, about what does Vietnam need to do in order to attract more digital investment, I think just continue to grow. So as a business, we often look at investing in different countries all over the world. Today, we've already announced about 2 years ago an investment in Vietnam. We didn't specifically reveal the numbers of that investment, but it is in the hundreds of millions. And we would be always looking at expanding that investment in the coming years. And the decision for whether or not we expand that investment has to do quite simply with whether or not there is the demand from our customers for that expansion. And that doesn't only mean Vietnamese customers. That could also mean, other customers in Southeast Asia who are very keen to invest in Vietnam or to grow their businesses out of Vietnam into the rest of the region because of the huge amount of talent that is present in Vietnam in the digital space. And I think what would be incredibly enabling to grow that number, grow that business opportunity, the amount of demand in Vietnam for digital is basically, I think, what Secretary Tolam has been doing over the last couple of years, but certainly in the last few months. And that is to state very clearly what the plan is for digital, and to signify very clearly to investors writ large that he is committed to supporting those investments. And so we're seeing that already happening and having very, very positive impact. I concur with Dan. I think, and I will say this as a personal as my personal observation. About 18 months ago, at the height of that whole process for trying to stamp out anti-corruption, I met with a number of embassies. I'm not going to say which ones, and a number of other companies who are our customers, and there was a concern, a genuine concern and fear that there was so much uncertainty, that government organizations were slowing down, that they weren't sure if they were able to do business in the way that they were hoping to be able to do business with fast, efficient processes. And that sentiment has changed. I think in the last, since the start of this year, but certainly in the last 7 months, I think in the last 3 to 4 months, I see a completely different set of statements. I see optimism around the fact that Sec Gen Tolam has done an amazing job with consolidating. I know it's painful in the initial stages, but things are more efficient now. People are getting processes cut, timelines are being cut. He's committing. His government is committing to things, and it is getting done. So I think that is something that the business community is seeing, and they're feeling very bullish about it. I completely agree with that. And so I think, from my perspective, continue making those statements. Obviously, I think the broader geopolitical landscape right now is introducing a layer of uncertainty for businesses, but it is a temporary thing. As with most things in the world, sometimes you have to go through a bit of pain and uncertainty before you get to the better outcome on the other side. And I'm fully confident, based on my time in Southeast Asia, as well as, I was in DC for the last couple of weeks, perhaps no surprises to anyone on the why. And it's very, very clear to me that the Vietnamese government has a very clear direction and vision for how they are going to engage with the US government in relation to tariffs. So I think that's, again, a very positive signal to the business community, who would be obviously very concerned about certainties.
Let me stay a little bit on the technology future question. Chinh, when we had the group from Saigon, and Chinh made a very important presentation about, what are you going to buy? What are you going to build? Vietnam has resources, but it doesn't have resources for everything. And I think Annabelle, I think your instincts are correct. But that book that I gave you and Ambassador Kritenbrink is a story about what happens in Vietnam after the Six-Party Congress, and what do they do, right? There's now as Lian Hoang said, the 14th Party Congress, and Vietnam is deciding what to do. And I think I share the idea that Tolam has unique and dominant leadership skills. I share that understanding of him. I do think to the part of the issue that Chinh raised at the last sort of working session we had with the group of technology people, I'm trying to determine whether Vietnam has state-led technology development, or, as Mr. Tolam wants, private sector-led technology development. And it seems to me, if you have the Ministry of Public Security building the National Data Center, and you have Viettel trying to build a hyperscale cloud, you have in Vietnam state-led, right now in the swing state, it's being led by the state, not by the private sector. How big a problem, you want to add to that?
No, I think that's a good question. There could also be a transition, which could start with state-led, and it could go more into the private sector, entrepreneur sector. I think it's a good example. That is Singapore, obviously, and in some ways Taiwan also followed the same example. But I like your question, Tommy.
And that question is it compatible, right? Is what they're building, Annabelle, is what they're building compatible with what Chinh is talking about?
Yep.
Tough question.
I mean, I think the short answer is, first of all, there is and there must be enough space for both. Okay? It is not, it's not one or the other. Okay. And I think we've seen many countries do that. But the challenge is, and it's always going to be the devil's in the details, is when there is a state-led initiative, and as with most things technology-related, first of all, the data center business is pretty complex. But what we're talking about is cloud. We're not talking about data centers. So cloud is a whole different scale and a whole different level. And I've seen many governments try to build their own national data centers. And and they sometimes succeed at finishing the bill, sometimes they don't succeed at finishing the bill. But even after they've successfully built their data center, they realize that the technology that they're putting into the data center, the services layer, is not something that they can ever get to a global scale, or what is globally, the most cutting edge version of that technology. And so the reality is, there is definitely room for both, but it depends on how long it takes for the government or the state to understand what room is for what, what entity. What should the public sector, state-driven investments do? What should the private sector cloud investments do? And that process, I'm Singaporean. I came from the Singapore government, and I saw them. They were very forward-leaning. They really wanted to get it right. They're technocrats, much like the Vietnamese policymakers are. And it still took them a process of about 10 years to fail, learn from their mistakes, and then figure out what the right balance was. And I think today, where we are with the Singapore government, if you had asked me 5 years ago, would they have gotten there, I would have said, I don't know. So they were very focused at that time, particularly for sensitive data like healthcare data, to keep that data on premise in their own private data centers, which they believed were very, very secure. And they had very smart people working on cybersecurity. They had very smart people. They collaborated with companies to build those data centers. And for a few years it was going well. But then there was a very, very public incident, as is often the case. And the oversight was, without going into too much detail, a very, very classic cybersecurity problem. Basically, they didn't have sight or view of all their assets. They didn't have a good user interface to be able to see where all their IT assets were. And so there was this computer that was sitting in this building that was connected to the network, but hadn't been updated in 3 years. Now, I think most of us have very basic, at least basic cybersecurity understanding now. Not updating a computer for 3 years is really not a good thing from a cybersecurity posture. And why was it not updated? Because there was someone in the IT department who had a friend. And this computer needed to be updated physically. He needed to take a flash drive, bring the update, plug it into the computer, and update it. And his friend was sitting in the building. He wasn't. And he asked his friend, could you help me? I'll send you the file. You just update the computer when I send you the file. His friend did, and helped him update the computer for a few times. That guy then quit. His manager quit. They didn't have a good map of the IT equipment. And his friend was still working in that department. That's how they figured this out. Hadn't done anything, because obviously that was not his job. He wasn't meant to be updating that computer. And so that was the way in which the bad actor entered the system. It was very public. There were about 1 million Singapore health records lost. Sorry, not lost, but breached. And it included the Prime Minister's health records, which is not great. So overall, I think there was a very, very quick and transparent process, admittedly, to understand what had gone wrong. And right now, that health database, as with many other government services and data, is put on the cloud. But the Singapore government is also then thinking, okay, how do we ensure that we meet our sovereign needs and requirements? And so they have long conversations with us about that, and they still do run some private data centers by themselves. So I think, to answer your question, Tommy, that was a very long one, but there is enough room for both, but we need to figure out how to make sure that it is the right balance.
Tommy, can I come in just for 1 second on this?
Sure.
I think you're right to focus on the tech sector for obvious reasons, because I talked about the long work towards a comprehensive strategic partnership, and as I used to tease Ambassador Zoom, why can't we have one? Well, the whole reason why we were able to upgrade to a comprehensive strategic partnership in 2023, I think it was twofold. It was a reflection of the trust that we had built over the many decades. But secondly, and Ambassador Zoom came back to lead the negotiations on the joint statement, so he knows. I think more than anything, and Ambassador Zoom, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think Vietnam saw the upgrade in the partnership with the United States as key to achieving its development goals in the tech space. And when you look at the joint statements negotiated around the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, it's dominated by our cooperation in tech and America's assistance to help Vietnam achieve those tech goals. And I think we can play a huge role there. But I think that's, it was that combination of trust and then meeting Vietnam's own economic development interests and the role that U.S. could play in tech. I think that's what it brought about. But just to state the obvious and address the elephant in the room, I'm worried that if we don't get through this current moment, namely manage the tariff issue, that we're not going to get to these issues or that these objectives are going to be derailed. I know the Vietnamese friends were shocked and bewildered and angered when they saw the level of tariffs that were proposed, 46% tariffs that were proposed to be levied on them. But I think in classic Vietnamese fashion, I give our Vietnamese friends great credit. General Secretary Dolam got on the phone, one of the first leaders to call President Trump. They sent the Deputy Prime Minister to Washington. And then, of course, a week later on April 9, the President announces that we're going to have this pause and negotiations will commence. And I'm cautiously optimistic that Vietnam knows how to negotiate. And if the Trump administration wants a deal, I think a deal can be had along the lines that you've outlined: commercial purchases, market access, maybe investment. And I hope we can do that for the sake of our relationship and for the benefit of turning to these tech development goals that are probably the more important thing.
Tommy, if I can just add, I agree with Annabelle, of course, the comments you said, but I think Vietnam can dream bigger in the tech sector. Vietnam does not need to follow and do the same things and provide some tech IT services and support. I think Vietnam, with the talent that it has, with the educational base that it has, it could be a Taiwan in the chip sector. It could be in Israel in the cybersecurity sector. So Vietnam has the potential, has the resources to dream bigger in tech, given the resources inherent therein. I don't know exactly what sector it is. Popular phrases including AI, data, security, whatever it is. I think Vietnam should pick a niche. Government should support it, and the private enterprise should foster and dream big. Sure. Let's open it up for questions and answers. I think we have 10 minutes, 15 minutes. We'll take 2 questions at a time.
Question for our American panelists. I remember when I was interning at an international consulting firm in Hanoi, where Apple wanted to send a letter to Prime Minister Phạm Minh Chính regarding the power outages in Vietnam during the summer of 2023. It stated that with power cuts happening to factories and production lines, that their productivity, but also the conditions of their machinery might be impacted and could create long-term problems for Apple's production in Vietnam. And what lesson I learned from that is, before we talk about the roadmap, when we talk about the roadmap to the future, as we were talking about, for example, the tech sector, you also have to think about how to create the framework and the infrastructure that will support that future. For example, Vietnam needs to upgrade its, for example, transportation, railways, port logistics, internet infrastructure, power supply, which all are experiencing, problems when it comes to delivering what foreign, especially like foreign investors, need to have a stable production base or a stable service base in Vietnam. And what that leads to my question is, what is being done to, and what should be done to help Vietnam merge with international compliance standards? For example, Vietnamese foods could be more compliant to USDA regulations. Vietnamese medicine could theoretically follow FDA regulations, things like that. That would create a standard. My name's Sun Dang, student from NYU.
Thank you. Second question. Good question.
Hi, I'm Ming. I am a freshman at Columbia College, and my question is: with the current tariffs being negotiated on, and with the the uncertainty of the situation, this question is mostly for Ambassadors Kritenbrink and Ambassador Giang. What are the opportunities that you think will be presenting itself to Vietnamese enterprises and American enterprises in these coming months, especially with the tariffs being being sorted out and with the negotiations going on? Thank you.
Let me try to answer the first question, and then I'll let the ambassadors deal with the second question. So I think it's a huge problem for Vietnam that the group of Vietnamese agencies have failed to create enough electricity. So the future of successful nations is going to be a combination of inexpensive electricity and inexpensive computing power. That's why the questions asked to Annabelle and AWS, how much computing power will you have to be a successful technologically driven nation, is driven by how much electricity do you have. It is obvious that the Vietnam state has failed to create sufficient electricity. The good news is Mr. To Lam is fully aware of that. And I think part of the decision and the actions of Mr. To Lam to consolidate the state and to make the state more efficient is driven by the phone call that, the letter that you had to write that Pham Minh Chinh recognized. Pham Minh Chinh deeply recognizes this issue. And I don't want to go into too many details, but Ambassador Zoom and I have been in conversations where the United States government has engaged Vietnam over this issue. I think everyone is fully aware that this juggernaut of not having enough electricity that problem will be solved, which I think is a different one than the second question, Chin, that you were asking.
Yep, agreed.
Can I just say, too, Tommy, and I agree with the questioner, one of the greatest barriers to Vietnam's development will be the infrastructure problems we've talked about. They've got to solve it. And I agree with everything Tommy said. Secondly, what I really liked about the question on the tariff challenge is one thing we try to talk about, with my new hat as a consultant at the Asia Group, talk about identifying not just challenges, but opportunities as well. And there are opportunities in the current moment. And especially now that I think the Trump administration has indicated not only is it going to conduct negotiations, but it actually wants to conduct deals. And if the quote-unquote reciprocal tariffs were used mostly as leverage for negotiation, you could see an outcome that could benefit both sides. And this is a place where if Vietnamese and American companies have concerns or issues in the current environment, now is the time to get them on the agenda, because a deal, I think, is there to be had, and companies ought to get their issues forward. And if we can conclude that deal, then we may land this in a good spot. Yeah, that would be my view.
Well, I think on the first question, even though I told my son don't direct his question to me, just want to.
I didn't want to identify who he was. Right?
But anyway, I just want to add that the energy is your turf. You know everything about that. I think to prepare for the future, infrastructure is crucial. That's correct. Technology is crucial. That's correct. But I think another third element is our education, to bring a good workforce labor for Vietnam to embrace the opportunities. I think is a key for success. And therefore, I believe in your red book, the most interesting chapter to me is about education. And I believe that the Vietnam should and must have the education system that on par with international education, in particular with the U.S. Therefore, the Fulbright model is a very good one, but we need more than that.
Yes, you do.
So I'd like to encourage you and also other friends and colleagues to continue to invest more in this regard.
Yeah, but the progress has been incredible, though, for Vietnam. There's a lot of issues right now still in Vietnam, power being one of them, as you pointed out, but the progress is incredible. First time I came back to Vietnam, the stamps that you had to mail out for the postcards had to have independent glue from another bottle that you put on the stamps, just to remember that. There was not like a licking stamp in 1995. The application to do a joint venture or to do a deal in Vietnam, the government required 40 years of financial models, 40 years of projections, because this is how Vietnam viewed the world. So in terms of the progress, just to give you two very simple examples, it's incredible, the progress. There were constant brownouts in the Metropole Hotel in 1995. That's not so long ago.
Yeah, that's not like
And I think the stamps came from the Soviet Union system where you literally have a bottle of glue. And I don't know why I remember that, Tommy.
Maybe I can also just say one quick thing about the infrastructure issues. And no doubt, I mean, Vietnam has challenges, but I also want to say that many other countries have challenges. And actually, it's not the worst moment to be trying to address a need to replan the grid at this point in time. So like, I go all over the world and all over the region, and we have power challenges in very advanced economies, including Singapore, including Japan. And these countries are now on the fly having to figure out how do they replan a grid that they thought they had planned well, because they didn't account for digital. And so while I fully acknowledge that infrastructure challenges are complex and take a long time to solve, I think it's not the worst thing that you are solving it now for the future, and that you are able to solve it with digital in mind. Because I think that that was not something the governments who thought they solved it, 15 years ago even. And they're now in a position where they're having to rethink everything, and they're also playing catch up. So I just wanted to say that it's not the worst thing to be having to solve this at this point in time.
Jen, you want to take some more questions?
Yes, more questions, please. Next two.
Hi, my name is Uyen. I'm a second year at Columbia studying biomedical engineering and entrepreneurship. I have a question regarding like the tech regulatory policy in Vietnam. I suppose that we all know that like major U.S. tech players have recently been ramping up investment in Vietnam, like NVIDIA, Google, Apple. And I myself have been working on a startup with my brother in terms of like edtech startup. And that's something I've been pretty hooked up on in terms of like regulations and policies. And which leads to my question as to how can these companies collaborate with the Viet government to kind of create a regulatory environment that could attract, I don't know, like foreign investment and also supports startup-driven innovation within the country.
Right. Thank you. Second question, please.
Hi, my name is Tieng. I'm a guest in the forum tonight, and I'm the Vietnamese American, and I'm proud to be a Vietnamese American. And thank you, Mr. Dang Hoang Giang and Mr. Daniel Kritenbrink, that brought up a couple points about the Vietnamese American here. And I appreciate the efforts that the Vietnamese government's making efforts to bridge the gap, Vietnamese American and Vietnamese global, to have a one unities. And as we marking today the 50th anniversary the Vietnam War. And so my question to both of you is, what steps have U.S. government and Vietnamese government took in healing the wounds left by the Vietnam War?
Thank you for that question. I think we have 10 minutes left, so we're going to ask the remaining 6 people to ask all 6 questions. We'll try to answer them all. Please.
Hi, my name is Ichan, and I'm a freshman at Fordham University. So, Ambassador Giang mentioned earlier about the huge number of Vietnamese American here in the U.S., and I can see that's an opportunities for us, for our nation. So, what are the plans, strategies, or policies do our country have to welcome them to go back to Vietnam to contribute, since we talk a lot about innovation, right? So basically, is there any way that we can let them know, yes, there are a lot of opportunities for you in Vietnam, please come back? Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much, everyone, for putting on this wonderful panel, and thank you, Professor Hoang, for a great semester as well, and Professor Vallely. I was just wondering now, with the talks of maybe U.S. companies shifting production out of China and some companies looking to India, is Vietnam able to absorb some of that production? Why aren't we hearing the name Vietnam being listed in these countries that when companies are looking to shift production out of China that they look to go into? And how can this contribute to future growth in Vietnam of not only industrial production, but also innovation?
Okay, next. 4 more questions. I hope everybody's remembering this.
I got typing. I'm old.
Homework for the panelists.
Xin chào. Myself, I'm Vietnamese Australian, and I'm also very interested in understanding the seeds, as we've iterated, the seeds that were sown after the war in terms of working in the shadows to heal Vietnam. With the U.S. partnership and also Vietnam, it became a very fundamental part in healing kind of the world in a lot of people's eyes. And I would want to just get some insight from maybe a moment from Daniel and Chudang for just what moments shaped your understanding and how did you come to see the significance of your own personal work. And I would like to know what kinds of seeds that you would also like to see sown for the future as well.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, my name is Olga Dror, and I'm professor of Asian Studies at Texas A&M University. Thank you so much for the fantastic panel, and I would like to ask a question that is somewhat similar to the question that was asked recently, but it's geared towards the future. You talked a lot about the speech that General Secretary Tolam had given, and I'm wondering whether there are any concrete measures that he or the government envision, or actually your opinions, what can be done for the reconciliation concretely, not just talking. Right?
Okay, thank you.
Hello, this question is directed to Chinh and Ambassador Giang. As a student of political theory and comparative politics, I learned that Vietnam is following a socialist market-oriented economy with an emphasis on state-owned enterprises. And state-owned enterprises controls the most exciting, the most important sectors within Vietnamese economy, which is EVN, electricity, Viettel, owned by the military, in charge of electronics. According to you, Chinh, and Ambassador Giang, should Vietnam move away from state-owned enterprises to a private sector in developing technology within this ongoing geopolitical world and an ongoing technological warfare? Thank you.
Thank you. Last question.
Hi, I'm David. I guess a lot of the tariffs has been kind of like most of the talk, but I think it's a reflection of sort of like a larger shift in the U.S. towards like isolationist policies. And I'm just wondering how although this is sort of like a larger issue than just Vietnam-American relationships, like what can be done to sort of like prevent like the breakdown of relationships that are caused by like changes in like U.S. views towards foreign policy.
Thank you. Okay, we have 10 minutes to answer 12 questions. Tommy, back to you.
Let me try to take a couple of the tech questions. The Google, the first question about Google, the question about what might happen in India or Vietnam, or what is the significance of the Tolam speech. The speech that I read at the beginning of the session was about a recent speech about the April 30th. The bigger Tolam challenge speech is also quite remarkable, and it's called Resolution 57. And Resolution 57 is the new roadmap of Vietnam's technology. When I read it, I know I was shocked by it. I was shocked that I don't know who wrote it. It's extremely perceptive. of the questions that were being asked, Chinh. And the question that's being asked is, where are we going to get the human capital to build what we want? And I think that's also connected, the question I asked Annabelle, it's connected to the April 30th speech. The idea that they need to have the diaspora and the universities around the whole world, they need to connect those two things to be able to be technologically competent. So I think in the question of, yeah, it will be easier in the future the tech space, Chinh, will be bigger. And I think that was clear from what's been said, and I think that touches on many of the questions. The India one's a little bit more complicated, but if we have time, I can talk a little bit about the India thing.
Great.
I could also maybe just building on the business ones. Sorry, I messed it up. I think we had one question asked about startups wanting to get involved in policy discussions. I have a very concrete way. In fact, we always help our customers, many of whom are startups, advocate and try and bring their issues to light when we hear that there are problems from them. But a few years ago, what we did was actually support the founding of a coalition of startups. There is a group right now called the Digital Prosperity for Asia Coalition, which is a group of startups who are engaging with governments all across Asia on policy issues that matter to them. And so I would strongly, and I'm sure there are other groups out there, but that was one that we were aware of because we helped to support them as they were thinking of setting up. And so, there are many groups out there that are doing this work, but use us, right? Use your vendors, basically, who are fully vested in this to ensure that the community gets very vibrant. I think the pain points that startups feel in regulation is very real, right? We are a bigger company, right? We can figure it out. But startups suffer every time there are hard regulations. And so being able to bring those concrete examples back to governments, including the Vietnamese government, to share with them how those processes can be improved will be very, very critical. And we can find out and figure out what the right means are. On de-risking, the short answer is yes. Vietnam, the reason why there is such a big trade imbalance today was precisely because of de-risking. And globally, companies were already de-risking from China since the last Trump administration. So this is not a new trend. I think if we think about things in maybe a more short to medium term view, the results of the negotiations of the tariffs, that's an opportunity, right? That's an opportunity to potentially result in companies thinking about whether they can pivot supply chains further. And depending on how successful Vietnam is in that negotiations, that could be an incredible opportunity for Vietnam. And I think, from our company's perspective, we do manufacture and produce a lot in Vietnam already today. There is a lot of great talent. There are some sectors that obviously remain very, very difficult to sort of shift supply chains from. I think a good example of that remains some of the high-end chips for semiconductors, but we want to see more countries being able to step up and do that. And I think Vietnam, has a really smart young population, but it will take time. It will take 10, 15, 20 years, even for the US, even if they wanted to bring the jobs back here today. I don't know that they would be able to. So, I think we're actively thinking about that, and that's the opportunity. I think India is obviously thinking about that, but they're not the only country that is, looking at how tariffs could potentially be a new opportunity for de-risking.
Thank you. There are a number of questions about about Vietnam and U.S. relations, which I think that Ambassador Dung can also help me with this, but I try to address them. First, on the reconciliation, there is twofold here. There is reconciliation between the U.S. and Vietnam. We have traveled a long way during the past 50 years, I think. And now we are at the point that we have mutual trust and confidence between the two countries and between the two peoples. Even for veterans, I have witnessed a lot of exchange between the veterans. Recently, we had a regular dialogue between the pilots of the two sides, and it showed how they fight each other on the air, on the sky. And this brings us close together ever. And the second thought is about the reconciliation between the Vietnamese community in Vietnam and here in the US. This is a policy, consistent policy of Vietnam, is that consider the Vietnamese people everywhere is a part of Vietnamese people, of our nation. And therefore the recent writings of the General Secretary has demonstrated clearly about that. But before that, we have implemented a number of policies to embrace and to make our nation and our people as one a long time ago. A lot of policies such as dual nationalities, land use rights, and many others are implemented and are now enforced. And I think that the Vietnamese community everywhere are free to go back to Vietnam and are free to get connection with the Vietnamese people, and with the people in the country. Also, we also going to have many other policies to encourage you to maintain close connection. For example, every year we have the Tết holiday, and to organize specifically for the overseas Vietnamese. And we also have the other, like the youth camp, summer camp for the people, for the young people to join us in Vietnam and to understand. And there are a number of trips for overseas Vietnamese people to Spratly Island or to visit the South China Sea and to understand how we are protecting our sovereignty, etc. And for the opportunities for overseas Vietnamese, including in the US, I think that the opportunities are equal for everyone. And I have a number of talks with many friends, Vietnamese American friends here, and they think that, they told me, not I tell them, but they told me that Vietnamese is a very good destination for investment and for innovation for Vietnamese people and for Vietnamese overseas Vietnamese people as well. And for us, from perspective of from the government, we encourage you to come back to Vietnam, but also we are happy when our community abroad success in the host country. You can be thrive and success here in the US, and we happy for that, and we wish that one day you can come back and become another Maurice Chang of Vietnam. So just do that. Let's just work together to thrive together. And on the innovation aspect, Vietnam has just, we haven't got that before, but recently with the new decree 57, a number of policies will be in place to encourage innovation and startup. And we have a venture fund, we have the institutes that dedicated to the innovation. The final issues is about the role of the state-owned enterprise and the private sector. You understand that the socialist system with the capital market with a socialist orientation, we have to maintain the role of the state-owned enterprise, that is for sure. But at the same time, Vietnam is now also strengthened and attach great importance to the role of private sector. However, the problem here is, and the key point here is to provide an environment for every sector of the private sector, every big or small, can have the equal footing and equal competition. That's why one of the articles that I also like in your red book is about the role of private sector in Vietnam. We don't want to turn from this one model of monopoly to another kind of monopoly. So we want that the private sector.
What do you call it, the red book?
I don't remember the name of the book. So we want to create an equal footing and equal system an equal legal system for everyone to have an opportunity for private sector to develop and success in Vietnam. I think that's almost address almost every issues.
And I think a stab maybe at a couple. Again, I really appreciated some of the questions from our Vietnamese American community. And I mentioned that I'm so proud of and so impressed by Vietnamese American community and the tremendous contributions that community has made to our beautiful country. To try to promote that reconciliation and in recognition of the importance of the Vietnamese American community, I actually spent a lot of time when I was ambassador in Vietnam doing engagement with the Vietnamese American community here domestically. I'd never done that as a U.S. diplomat. You're always focused overseas. But I think in recognition of the importance of the community, I did events, multiple events in D.C., Houston, all across California. And in addition to engaging and making sure that I understood and was sensitive to the issues of that community, I tried to do a couple of things. I regularly visited the Bien Hoa Cemetery outside of Ho Chi Minh City, which is, of course, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, the South Vietnam Cemetery, which I did that for hopefully obvious symbolic reasons. I also went to Chung Son, I also went to the Vietnam Wall, but I wanted to try to show respect to all those on all sides who sacrificed in the name of patriotism. And I also tried to engage the Vietnamese government to continue to allow the refurbishment of that cemetery to continue. And it's a beautiful story, actually. But again, I'm worried that reconciliation between the U.S. and Vietnam probably lags behind most between Vietnamese people and Vietnamese Americans. And I hope that we can see more of that. And to the young lady's question, I think travel and engagement is part of that. Is Vietnam able to absorb investment coming out of China? To what Annabelle said, that's been the story of the last decade, certainly accelerated after COVID, when I think for Vietnamese friends, they feel a bit betrayed and they feel whiplash. Hey, I thought you Americans were encouraging supply chains to relocate outside of China. And you wanted it to, you called it friendshoring. Aren't we your friend? Wasn't this a good thing? That's all true, but now the Trump administration has taken, in some ways, a different approach to say, well, we've got this massive trade deficit, so we have to deal with it. Look, the reality is this is what we face. And in the course of those negotiations that are ongoing right now, we're going to find out how this is going to resolve itself. I'm hopeful that we can end up in a spot where the tariff levels are manageable and that the impact on Vietnam can be minimized, because trade deficit really isn't the right lens through which to view these issues. I really appreciated the question over here. Your last name wouldn't happen to be Griffiths, would it? Yeah, I thought so. I want to thank your family and your mother in particular for what she's done on healing and post-war issues. Again, legacy of war issues, they're the foundation. That was the bridge to normalization that got us here. You asked for an anecdote or two. I'll give you just a couple. I thought when Senator John McCain passed, we opened up a condolence book to the Vietnamese public at the American Embassy in Hanoi, and I couldn't believe we got thousands upon thousands of Vietnamese public, from senior officials to average people walking in off the street. And the first person in line was an elderly Vietnamese gentleman who was a veteran who'd fought in the war, and he demanded to see the U.S. ambassador. It's like 8 in the morning. So I went down and saw him, and he said, I just wanted to shake your hand, and I wanted to let you know that I never met John McCain. I know he fought against us in the war, but I also know he led our reconciliation and the road back to our friendship, and I wanted the American ambassador to know that. So that was quite moving to me. Maybe I'll tell one other story. I was surprised to be the first American ambassador to ever visit a North Vietnamese military cemetery. It's 45 years after the war while I'm ambassador there, and I was shocked to find out that was the case. So I requested to go. I was eventually approved to go. It's quite moving and meaningful to me, and I can't tell you how many average Vietnamese people stopped me on the street in Hanoi, elsewhere, and they would say, aren't you that American ambassador who went to Chung Son? Thank you for what you did. Yeah, well, then there was the rap thing, but it just goes to show the foundation of the relationship continues to be, I think, respect and trust that flows from our history and reconciliation steps. And the seeds for the future, I think, are engagement, travel, promoting mutual understanding. I'll stop there.
Well, I think that concludes our panel. Thank you very much for the wonderful questions, and thank you very much for our panelists, Lian and Tommy. And I think it all comes down to me, it's not about the economic development, it's not about AI, it's not about even technology. It really comes down to the people. And when it comes to people, I think the Vietnamese characteristics of hard work, persistence, creativity. I think that will foster well in building a great foundation for Vietnam. And it includes, obviously, everybody in Vietnam, but it includes the network of people that's all over the world, whether you're in America, running Columbia's University's Vietnam Center right now, whether you're in Bhutan, whether you're in Israel, that network will all be part of the Vietnamese legacy. So thank you very much, everybody, for being here.